Well, here we are continuing in Isaiah. It's an exciting book. It's really a wonderful book that I'm really enjoying studying, really enjoying going through and preparing, and I hope you're being edified by it as well. Chapter 4, I call this chapter Back to the Future, and it continues and concludes this section that began in chapter 2, verse 5, where he's talking about the judgment and the consequences, the judgment and the future glory of Israel, the consequences of their action. Notice in verse 1 begins with and 7 women shall take hold of one man. So this shows that this follows right along with chapter 3, that it's just continuing that, and really probably shouldn't have put a chapter break in here. It's only 6 verses. And as you know, chapters were added to the Bible much later. Both chapter and verse divisions were not in the original Bible. In fact, if you were to pick up say, a original or close we have to original manuscript of Isaiah, a scroll, it would just be continuous. Wouldn't even have spaces between the words. It's just one continuous line after line after line that's written on the scroll. You can actually go online, and if you Google Isaiah manuscript Hebrew, you'll probably be able to find some photographs of our most ancient copies of the book of Isaiah. But these chapter and verse divisions were added much later. The Dead Sea Scrolls use some Hebrew paragraph demarcation, so that is the earliest I know of someone trying to divide the text into more manageable pieces. What we have today, the modern chapter and verse divisions, were first introduced in the 1200s. So first the chapter divisions came in the 1200s, and then later in what's called the Geneva Bible, which was printed in 1560, the Geneva Bible had both chapter and verse divisions that we use today. So that's where they come from, and a little bit for you to know about the Bible and some background on it. And sometimes you do come across sections like this that they're in a chapter and begin with a new verse, but looks like they probably fit with the prior chapter as an unfortunate division there. So in verse 1 then, we see this kind of startling thing. 7 women will take hold of one man in that day, saying, we will eat our own bread and wear our own clothes, only let us be called by your name. Take away our reproach. Well, what's happened here is that because of the prior judgments that we've been looking at since chapter 2, verse 6 and so forth, because of those judgments, so many men have perished in judgment, perished in war. Remember, there's going to be civil war in the land as well. That there's a scarcity of men, and women in that culture particularly would be reproached for not having children. So they will be willing to share a husband in order to avoid that reproach. The judgment has been so severe. Verses 2 through 6 then, we see that the righteous remnant from chapter 3, verse 10. Let's go back there. So in chapter 3, verse 10, God says, tell the righteous that it will be well with them, for they shall eat the fruit of their deeds. So there's going to be a righteous remnant preserved even during this time of severe judgment. And what we see in these verses, the righteous remnant will be preserved throughout the whole day of the Lord. He's going to take care of them. He's going to protect them during that period of judgment that's going to come on the earth. Verses 2 and 3, then, we see also that those recorded for life in Jerusalem, God has an elect. He has a group of people that he's determined from before creation, according to Ephesians 1:4, that are going to be holy and blameless before him. Later on in the book of Revelation talks about the scroll of the Lamb on which are inscribed the names of the elect. We see that here. They're recorded for life in Jerusalem. That these people are going to return. This righteous remnant is going to be preserved and returned. And in verses 5 and 6, he uses imagery from the Exodus, picturing God's presence in Jerusalem itself. And it anticipates, I think, this future kingdom of Jesus in Jerusalem. Well, he will be present among his people, that he will be there. Again, in Revelation 20, we see that kingdom established. Chapter 20 of the book of Revelation describes that millennial kingdom, what it's called. Chapter 2, verses 1 through 4 have described aspects of it. Later in Isaiah, he's going to prophetically describe other aspects of that kingdom. But for now, he's talking about verses 5 to 6, God being present among his people as a tower of smoke, a column of fire. He's using that Exodus imagery to remind us of what's going to happen. We see this also kind of an example of what I'd call a multiple. Some people call multiple fulfillment. I call progressive fulfillment of prophecy. So we see in chapter 2, verse 5 through chapter 4, verse 6, this worldwide day of judgment that's caused by the apostasy of Jerusalem and Judea. So we see that and experienced what we're going to see as we go through the book of Isaiah is that this is going to be experienced, this judgment is going to be experienced first locally in in Judah and Jerusalem, and partially. So it's going to happen when Assyria invades the northern kingdom and takes them into captivity. It's going to happen again when in 597 and in 605 and in 586 when Babylon invades the southern kingdom. So we're going to see this prophecy fulfilled partially and fulfilled locally in Israel. But it's also going to be experienced globally. So as you can see, as we've gone through these sections, I pointed out where the judgment not only has on Judah and Jerusalem, but all mankind, all men, all people, all nations. It has this global dimension that is yet to come and is still in our future. So it's going to be experienced globally and completely during the tribulation period and the establishment of the millennial kingdom. We'll see this later in, I'm sure we'll study the book of Revelation at some point, but if you go read it yourself, you'll see immediately that some of the tribulations, the seal or the bowl or the trumpet judgments that are bowled out, seal, trumpet, and bowl that are poured out, bear marked resemblance to things that happened at the hand of Moses to Egypt when God was first bringing his people out of Egypt. I think this is intentional. I think what God is communicating to us, that what he can do locally and partially, he can and will do globally. So this is a warning to us. It's an invitation to us to heed God's word. It's a warning to us that what he says he can do, he's proven he can do it. So we have no excuse. So, what's a personal application of this chapter? Well, I think increased faith, increased confidence, increased anticipation that Christ is coming, that what we see has happened to the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom in the history of Israel is a testimony to us that God is going to carry out exactly what he says he will do. And it's a warning to us to be prepared for that, to stand firm, to be faithful, and live in light of the coming of the Lord. So again, brothers and sisters, I pray that this is being educational for you, helping you sort out Isaiah. I want to make it clear and I pray I am, that, Isaiah's audience didn't know about a future judgment, didn't know about a future kingdom. Well, they knew about a future kingdom, but they were expecting it to come very soon. And here we are. Isaiah's writing in about 700, and we are living in 2021, and the kingdom is not here yet. So we are living in anticipation of that, and we have the witness of Israel as to the certainty of its coming. So God bless you, and I'll see you in Isaiah chapter 4 to 5 tomorrow.